But something you can do is to take some hardwood cuttings, and I'm going to show you a practical way of doing this at the end of this PowerPoint. Um, but just to go through the process, I know there's lots of words here, but you will be able to read it on a PDF that I've done. So why do you take hardwood cuttings? Well, it's a way of taking cuttings that, number one, you'll get more shrubs. It's for shrubs, basically, that you take these cuttings from. And they're shrubs which are deciduous. So in other words, they lose their leaves in the autumn, winter. So they're woody. And what you're going to do is to make plants for free. So you can have more plants in your garden. You could grow a hedge from hardwood cuttings. You might want to put things in containers, or you might want to share them with friends or have a plant sale. So how do you do it? Well, you cut pencil thick stems from the new growth of your shrubs. So you can see the difference usually of what growth has come this year, this current season. It's usually lighter in colour, lighter brown. It's not gnarled and woody. And pencil thick is quite a good thing to remember because it's an easy sort of size to remember. Shrubs that you can do this with are things like buddleia, dogwood or cornus, the coloured dogwood stems, currants. There are flowering currants and fruiting currants, of course, red currants, black currants, white currants, gooseberries you can do it with, forsythia, fuchsia, where it's become a big bush, honeysuckle, hydrangeas. There are many, many plants. And basically, you can have a go at anything that is, as I said, deciduous and it loses its leaves. It's possible to do evergreen, but a bit more difficult. So we'll just talk about deciduous. So you'll cut from this year's growth, and you can cut a whole stem if it's possible, or at least a cutting that's about 30 centimeters long. So you bring it indoors and prepare it for planting. You just cut a long piece. And you want to pot it up. So you've got a pot, because this is going to go back out into the garden once you've prepared it. You've got a pot that's up to 30 centimeters deep, so anywhere between over 6 inches up to a foot. You need some multipurpose compost. Sand is useful to mix in because it gives drainage. You don't want these cuttings to rot. And then you need some labels and a pen. Now, when you're taking the cuttings, if you're taking cuttings from different plants, it might be an idea just to write on a piece of paper and have an elastic band so that you can indicate and remember what the cuttings were. Coloured cornus is easy to see, but other plants, it just looks like a wooden stem and it might be really difficult to remember. So you could label it up while you're in the garden, and then when you come in, you're going to put a label on. If you're going to do this, you need to do it all in one day, because if you take the stems and then leave them indoors for longer period, they'll dry out. So it's more successful if you take the cuttings and then go straight in and pretty much that day do your closer cutting. So you've got your long stems, you take them indoors, you've got your pot ready, you've got a multipurpose compost and you've mixed in. It can be half the amount of sand with compost. Anything up to that. It's not, you don't have to be exact about it. I mean, I have known just putting them into sand on their own because, well, the roots will grow. So you cut the stems just underneath a node or a growing point, a straight cut. And when I say just under, 1/4 of an inch, 1/2 an inch, something like that. And you'll see a growing point because there would have been leaves there, or you'll see just a sticking out almost like a bud. And then at the top of your cutting, you're going to make an angled cut so that you can see the angled cut is the top, because again, when you've got a stem and you start cutting it, it's difficult to remember which way up it is. So if you know that the straight cut is the bottom and the angled cut is at the top, and that goes above a node where a bud is. A node is the botanical name for it, but you know, it could be a little point. And your cuttings should be between 15 centimeters and 30 centimeters, so between 6 inches and a foot. And you've got that variable because plants grow in different ways. So some have more growth and some have less, but it doesn't really matter as long as you do that. So you've mixed up your mixture of multipurpose and sand, put it into your container. Again, a container should be something like just over 6 inches to a foot, depending on the size of your cuttings. And you can push in the cuttings 2/3 of their length. So remembering to keep the angled cut on top. Some people say you can put hormone rooting powder, but it's unnecessary because these cuttings will take so long that will just have rotted off. So there's no need to do anything to them other than just have firmed the compost mixture, push in your cuttings. They can be as close as you like. So if you want to take lots, you can put them, literally 1 centimetre apart, 2 centimetres apart. Often people say more, but it's not necessary. You water it outside or somewhere where you're not going to spill water, and you label. So if you've got a pot with different groups or a few different shrubs, you're going to have to label, I'd say have 3 labels in there to indicate which is which. And I would use a Sharpie pen rather than a pencil to make your labels, because they're going to be outside so long that the pencil will come off because it's outside in the weather. So use something like a pen that won't come off in water to make the label. So that's going to stay. Now you can just put them in a sheltered spot in the garden. It's a bit like your leaf mold. It doesn't have to be in the sun. It doesn't have to be anywhere special. Just somewhere sheltered in the corner of a garden where they're going to get the rain from the weather. They're hardy, so it isn't a problem. Except if you've got a long period of freezing conditions coming, then really it would be a good idea if you put them in something like a greenhouse, a polytunnel, somewhere that's frost-free, or at least is keeping the frost off them, or you can put them under a cloche. So the cuttings will callus over during the winter, and that area, which is at the bottom of your cutting, will start to grow roots in the spring. But they're only starting to grow in the spring. So generally, we leave them in the pot that you've put them in for a year, so that, in other words, by the end of the summer next year, you'll be able to knock out the pot, either plant the cuttings, the rooted cuttings now, into other pots, or you can put them in the garden. You may not be successful with every single one of the cuttings, but if you take a few of each plant that you want, then odds on some of them will have rooted. Remember to water in the growing season. So obviously you don't need to water in the winter, but of course, once the spring and summer start, there will be periods of dryness. So it's a good idea to remember to give them a bit of water, because you don't want them dying from being dry. If you don't want to put them in a pot, you can, and you've got space, you can actually dig a little trench out in your growing area, put some sand at the bottom so it's drained, and just pop them in there in the same way as I've said to do them in a pot. But again, leave them there for a year. Well, I've been out to take some hardwood cuttings and looking at different plants that you can do it with. And one of the ones that I mentioned before are the cornus, which you can see have lovely red, green, black, different coloured stems for winter interest, but are really useful and easy to use as a hardwood cutting. And you can see I've taken quite long stems, so I'm going to be able to take more than one cutting from them. Where they've got leaves, I'll just pull the leaves off because they would have fallen anyway. And if they don't want to come off easily, I'll cut them off, because we don't really want them to have leaves under the soil because they'll rot off. And we don't need them to have the leaves anyway because they're just not necessary at this time of year. So I'm going to also show you, so it's fairly clear, that's this year's growth. I can see it because it's not gone brown. It's more difficult on some of the other ones. This is climbing hydrangea. Now there's a lot of leaves, which I'm going to pull off. And I don't know whether it's obvious to you that this is the new growth because it's a lovely golden brown colour. And as you get further back, the colour goes darker. And that's last year's growth. You can see where I've put the name so that I remember what it is. I've just put an elastic band around it. So I'm going to take a cutting from this hydrangea. I'm going to pull off these leaves from this new growth. So I'm going to take my secateurs, and you need to make sure that your cutting implements are sharp enough so that you do a nice clean cut. I'm going to do a cut straight underneath the growth point. And I think you should be able to see that there's a growth point because you can see the buds there. So I'm going to do a straight cut there. And then I'm going to look for another growth point. And there's one here with two. And I'm going to snip at an angle so that I remember that's up. Now, you can see there's a few buds on this, so I'm going to pull them off because this is where my roots are going to grow and I don't need to have any buds. So you can happily rub them out, as we say. And the only ones I need to leave, maybe, are the ones at the very top, because that's where any leaves or stems are going to grow from. And the bottom is where any roots are going to grow from. So I've done one there, and that's what, about 6 inches, just slightly under. So it's going to be different doing it with these corners because they're quite long, and the gap between the growth areas, the nodes, are this long, which is almost the same length as that cutting. So that shows you how different it can be. Now that's the bottom one on this one. So again, straight cut. And then maybe I'll just do above that one, angle. Then there's not another growth point. So even if I want to take another one, I've still got to cut off because I only want to have it just below the growth point. If you don't do it just before, this is extra stem that's just going to rot. It's not helpful. And then I'm going to look up here and see where there's another one. Maybe there, take an angle. It's getting a bit thin there, but worth a try. So I've got quite a few here. And I'm going to, let's see, what other plants have I got? I've got an elder. Like elderflower, has the elderflower. So that's quite a long stem that I've taken. And again, I'll be removing all these leaves that I don't need. But this has given me quite a nice long stem. Again, straight cut at the bottom. Let's get rid of that. And I can do an angled cut, and I'll just trim off that leaf. And then another one, straight cut. Let's get rid of the extra. And an angled cut there. So trim off extra leaves. Of course, if it was later in the month, maybe these leaves would have fallen naturally. So you can do it any time. And these cuttings you can take really up to the winter months. So I've got my cuttings ready. And of course, I would do lots. So if I want a red one, I'll do several red cuttings. If I want a green one or whatever, that's the best way of doing it, because you just never know which ones will take and which ones won't take. So I've got my pot here. I'm recycling a plastic pot. I've given it a wash so it's nice and clean. And I'm going to fill it with my mixture, and I've made a mixture here. So here's a mixture of multi-purpose compost and sand. It's about equal parts, but as I said before, it doesn't really matter to be exact. It's just so that it's good and well draining. And I got sharp sand. When I say sand, you don't want builder's sand. You want to use sharp sand. You can get horticultural sharp sand, but you can also just get ordinary bags of sharp sand, and that's absolutely fine. So I mixed it up. I'm going to get my gloves on. Make sure there's no big lumps, as usual. Okay. And then I'm just going to use another container to fill so that I can fill it up. Or you can use your towel. Now I'm going to fill it up completely because I don't need to make any space, as you might if you were planting a plant. In this case, tamp it down a bit so there's no air holes. So there's my pot full up. Just press it down lightly. And I'm going to put my cuttings in about 2/3 deep, so you can sort of work out where 2/3 comes. And you can put them near the edge. So I'm going to push it down. I've got the slanted cut at the top. I'm going to put my other one in over there. So you can put them quite close. It's fine. There's my other one here. There's my taller one. So you can see they're just sitting in, it's all very brown, so you can't see very much in light. I'm going to put my labels in with my Sharpie pen because I don't want it to wash off with the rain. So I'm going to put hydrangea. And I'll put in when I did it, October 2024. As you never know, I might have forgotten. So that's my hydrangea. So I'm going to put it over there. And I'm going to put my Cornus dogwood. Again, October 2024. And if you've got a group, obviously, you might want to put in the name of the person who's taken the cuttings or the group who's taken the cuttings so that you can identify them. And I'm going to pop that in there and so on. So I could have quite a lot of different plants in here, all with labels on, which is fine, which shows me what's in there. And what I'm going to do now is take it outdoors, give it a water, just a quick water, just to settle the compost really. And then I'm going to find somewhere sheltered in my garden to pop it into a corner. So it might be in the corner where you've got shrubs around it, and leave it. And as I said, only look out in case the weather, the weather is going to be particularly bitter. And if it's frozen all the time, try and put it in a polytunnel or in a slightly more sheltered place that you've got. But it's not going to do any growing over the winter months. It's going to be, as I said, callousing over. That bottom is going to be, it sort of hardens over and it makes a base ready for the roots to come. And as soon as the weather is slightly warmer, bring it outside, so that it's not in a bright sunny place because that'll dry it up, but bring it outside and let it grow on and just keep it slightly watered. And then hopefully at the end of the summer, you will have some nice new plants. You'll be able to see if they're successful because you'll see leaves growing on your cuttings. So it's a great way of making free shrubs, and it's good fun to have. So I hope that's been helpful.